Erev Tov. Good evening. I was two requests were put to me. One is that I should read the Hebrew text before I read the English translation. So this is, I will try to do it. It's a little difficult to interweave the two languages, but I'll try to do my best, read also the Hebrew. The second request was that I should repeat the questions which you hopefully won't ask. So I repeat them. All right? So we skipped quite many chapters in the book of Bereshit and arrived this night at the awesome story of the Akedah. And may I say, when I speak with English-speaking persons, I usually think about the difference between Judaism and Christianity. I speak in Hebrew, it doesn't occur to me that this is interesting, because the audience here, they don't compare themselves with another religion. The people who have been raised or grew up in an English-speaking country, they are in the shadow of the ruling religion. And I think it's very important to point out not only about the Jewish-Christian common heritage, but also the deep differences between the two religions. And as I said last time, that we don't speak in Hebrew about the fall, and we don't speak about the initial, you say the initial sin? Thank you, the original sin. We don't, in Hebrew you say the binding of Yitzchak, the Akedah. In English you say the sacrifice of Yitzchak, and you see the whole difference between the two religions. Because Christians naturally regard the story of the Akedah as a prefiguration of the crucifixion. And they say in both stories, a father sacrifices his son. So, in the so-called in the Old Testament, the sacrifice is not executed. But in the New Testament, you have the real story. So they call it the sacrifice of Yitzchak, or they could call it the semi-sacrifice of Yitzchak. And the sign of Christianity is the cross. We speak about the Akedah, which means that there is a binding and there is no sacrifice. And the symbol of the Akedah is a shofar, which means not the glorification of sacrifice, but the glorification of Geulah, of redemption. So you see, the two religions, they use the same story, or they stand on the basis, on the common basis, but they go in very different directions. So we will always say Akedah in Hebrew, which is binding naturally. So the story starts, ויהי אחר הדברים האלה, והאלוהים ניסה את אברהם, ויאמר אליו אברהם, ויאמר הנני. And I have to speak a little about the first half of the story. In English it would be translated, and it happened after these things that God tested Abraham, and he said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. The phrase, אחר הדברים האלה, after these things, occurs quite often in the book of Bereshit, and it has two different meanings. It may mean that now we start a new story after an unspecified interval. אחר הדברים האלה, some time elapsed, and we have a new story. The other usage of this expression is in connection to the former story, we have a continuation. And these two options stand before us, and we have to make a decision, not so easy. What is the meaning here? Does it mean You cannot understand chapter 22 unless you read chapter 21, because chapter 22 happened after these things. All it means, we have an entirely new story. You can, I can decide between these two options only by rereading chapter 21, and we gave it to you in English too, and see whether there is a real strong connection between 21 and 22. So please look at the translation of 21, and you see, or I tell you, and you can see it, that in this chapter we have actually three stories. The birth of Yitzchak is the first story, the expulsion of Ishmael is the second one, and the third one is the pact between Abraham and the king of Gerar, a local king where in the Gaza Strip of today. So we ask ourselves, the birth of Yitzchak is relevant to the sacrifice or to the finding of Yitzchak or the potential sacrifice of Yitzchak? Naturally, it is highly important that the child which God demands was born only now after such difficulties. So I will read the beginning of chapter 21 because I like it very much. It is in Hebrew. It is something between prose and poetry. And you see, you realize that this is almost poetry by the many repetitions. In other words, things which are from the informative point of view not necessary are said again and again to celebrate them. So read it in Hebrew and then in English, and you will see the great happiness of Abraham and Yitzchak when this child was finally born. ואדוני פקד את שרה כאשר אמר, ויעש אדוני לשרה כאשר דיבר, ותהר בתלת שרה לאברהם בן לזקוניו למועד אשר דיבר אותו אלוהים. ויקרא אברהם את שם בנו הנולד לו, אשר ילדה לו שרה, יצחק. וימול אברהם את יצחק בנו בן 8 ימים, כאשר ציווה אותו אלוהים. Now we'll read it in English. And the Lord singled out Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. And Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in the old age at the set time that God has spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him. We've heard this 3 times already, right? Whom Sarah bore to him, Yitzchak. And Abraham circumcised Yitzchak, his son. You don't say, his son. You see what love there is in these superfluous words to what happened. Yes, he has a son. So he circumcised his son Yitzchak when he was 8 days old, as God has charged him. And Abraham was 100 years old when Yitzchak, his son, was born to him. And Sarah said, and now you see that our Sarah Imenu is a great poetess, like Mlemech in the last week, she's also writing or saying poetry. Laughter has God made me. Whoever hears will laugh at me, and so on. You see that she is playing with the word Yitzchak, which means he shall laugh. And you can say in English, he shall laugh who laughs last, right? Because Abraham was laughing when he was told that he will get a child, and Sarah was laughing, and this is a laugh of disbelief. So God says, you laughed and you laughed. You are supposed, or you are ordered to call this son Yitzchak. And whenever he's running around on the carpet in the living room, they remember that they actually did not believe that he will be born. So it's a wonderful name. This is chapter 1 of chapter 21, the first part in here. And this is highly relevant. Because if Yitzchak would have been born at a normal birth, it would be quite different when is demanded than when he was born in a miraculous way at such a late date. The second part is the expulsion of Ishmael from the house of his parents, of his house of his father rather, together with his mother Hagar. And I cannot go into it, I need for the 60 minutes. But there is a very intriguing literary parallelism between the story of the Akedah and the story of the expulsion of Yitzchak, of Ishmael. They are almost put in the same terms. First of all, the theme is very similar. You send your son Ishmael, you are ordered to depart from your both sons. First from Ishmael, then from Yitzchak. And both are almost killed. And Abraham is willing to do it, and it says, Vayashkem Abraham baboker, and he stood up early in the morning to comply with God's demand. And then it says that God sends an angel from heaven to Hagar and says, don't worry, don't be afraid. And she raises her eyes, and what does she see? What she didn't see before. That there are a lot of water there. And God sends an angel to rescue Yitzchak, and then he raises his eyes, and what does he see? He sees the ram which was there, Chazal say, from the days of creation. The ram didn't arrive suddenly. In other words, if we are depressed or in despair, we don't see the potential rescue which is right there. So the stories are very similar, and the stories end with a great benediction to Ishmael. You will be a great people, and the great benediction to Yitzchak, you will be a great people. So you ask yourself, if you study it carefully, it's very beautiful. What is the meaning? It's not enough to make comparisons. We have already to ask what is the expressive aim of this comparison. And I dare to say that it means that there are two Akedot. There are two stories of Akedah. There is Akedah of Ishmael, and there is Akedah of Yitzchak, because they are put in the same terms. Which means that the expulsion of Ishmael was for Abraham like a preliminary Akedah. He has to sacrifice his son, his relationship to his son. Which makes the second Akedah much worse. Because now it's the only son of Yitzchak, of Abraham, right? You shudder when you realize that in chapter 21 there was already a preliminary Akedah. So we need to read the former chapter before we read this chapter. The last portion of the chapter 21 is, we could call it a political pact of non-aggression. The neighbors come to Abraham and say, we see that God helps you out, so please let us make a pact, and you will swear to us? Yeah. Swear. Is difficult for me. You will swear that your children won't attack our children? And if you read this, you can say that finally Abraham arrived at the Holy Land, or in the land of Canaan. Because look please at the very last verses of chapter 21, and you see that you can say that finally his aliyah reached its peak. So I read verse 33. And Abraham planted a tamarisk eshel. He planted a tree which is called eshel in Hebrew in Be'er Sheva, which means that this Bedouin is starting to plant trees. You see, it's a deeper connection with the soil, right? It's not one tree. It's probably a couple of trees. And he invoked there the name of the Lord, and he built a synagogue, and he invoked the name of the Lord, everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the land of the Philistines many days. You know that no news is good news. Right? Many days, nothing happened. This is what we want, right? ויגור אברהם בארץ פלישתים ימים רבים. He has trees, he has an altar, and he has peace. And here comes chapter 22 and says, he thought that his life is peaceful. He thought that his aliyah has terminated in Beersheba. Oh no, he doesn't know that the highest test is still in store for him. And the worst is to come. And this is our story. So I believe that we can say that אחר הדברים האלה means after all what happened in chapter 21. Now the second half of verse 1 is והאלוהים ניסה את אברהם, and God tested Abraham. What does this mean? This we call in English or in literature dramatic irony. Dramatic irony means that the narrator informs the reader a piece of information which is unknown to the hero. Behind the back of the hero, the Torah tells us this is a test. So for many years I believed that the story is so awesome and so terrifying that the readers need some kind of to calm them down, how do you say, to reassure them and say, it's only a test. Don't take it too seriously. But finally I realized that the word only is not written here. It doesn't say it's only a test. If I come to a friend and ask for 20,000 shekel, and he takes out his checkbook, and they say, oh, don't bother. I was only testing your friendship. This is one story where you have the word only. But I can come to my friend and say, please lend me 20,000 shekels, and he takes out his checkbook and he writes, and then I say, I'm so happy not only for the money, I'm happy that our friendship has stood the test. That's how you say in English? Which means this is a real test, not a fake test. And most tests of life are real and not artificial tests. So you cannot say that this verse calms us down and says, reassures us and says, this is only a test. So now we are in a true difficulty. What do these words mean? Because they are probably very important. Dear reader, don't be afraid. God does not want the flesh of children. It's not that God is hungry. It's God that wants the faithfulness of his believers. This is what the story is about. It is a test. It is a true test. But it is not a test that, as you could have mistakenly think that God is like Moloch. Right? That God wants child sacrifice. So it mitigates to a certain extent our terror reading this story. And now the story starts and we don't know whether it's night or day. We don't know whether Abraham is looking at the stars or sleeping. We know only that God calls out Abraham and he says, Hineni, which is in English, here I am. And it's quite a difficult word. As you know, here I am is the word of presentness. When I was learning in elementary school in Yerushalayim centuries ago, in a different century, they would say Uri, and I would say Hineni. This was. Today they say we don't have time for Hineni. But we would say Hineni, which means here I am. It's a word of presentness. But in the Bible, almost always, the word of presentness means preparedness, which means I'm fully with you, which I never meant when I said I didn't know that I'm supposed to, what hineni means, and if I would have known, I would look for another word. So why is it so? You have to learn a small piece of biblical psychology to understand why preparedness is expressed by presentness. Because in biblical psychology, whether something happened or not is decided more internally than externally. For instance, next week somebody will ask you, have you been at Pardes last week? So you said, for sure, they even took a picture of me. This is Western thinking. If they have a picture, it means a proof that you have been here. In biblical thinking, it doesn't mean anything. Maybe you have dreamt. Maybe you have slept. Maybe you have thought about other things. Were you really there? Could you say hineni? Which means I am truly with you. Sometimes on the phone we ask, are you with me? The biblical answer is that for sure I am fully with you. I am with you. Hineni. So if God asks Adam and Chava, where are you? It's not a question about the location. It's a question of why don't you face me? Why can't you say hineni? Why do you evade me? When Jonah escapes God, it does not mean that he thinks that you can flee from God. It means that he turns his back on God, that he disconnects himself with God. He cannot say hineni because he doesn't want to go to Nineveh. So this is very, very important in biblical in the psychology and in biblical literary expression. That Abraham starts the story by not saying yes. He says, whatever you demand of me, I am prepared to do. Poor man, he didn't know the continuation of the story. But it starts with hineni, the strongest word in this connection of a test. Let's continue. Verse 2. ויאמר, קח נא את בנך, את יחידך, אשר אהבת, את יצחק, ולך לך אל ארץ המוריה, והעלהו שם לעולה, על אחד ההרים, אשר אומר אליהם. And he said, and God said, take pray is now, please. Right? Take pray your son, your only one, whom you love, Yitzchak, and go forth to the land of Moriah, and offer him up as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I shall say to you. So God says to him, please, take your son, your only son, your beloved one, Yitzchak, and make a burnt offering of him in an indefinite location, somewhere in Har Moriah, in the place which I'll show you. Ask yourself, why do we need these three adjectives before the word Yitzchak? God could have said, take Yitzchak. So whoever knows Rashi knows one of the most beautiful midrashim, but I don't want to repeat it because I am searching for the pshat. What does God say? Or let me give you an example from everyday life. If I come with a request to a friend, I can upgrade my request and say, I come to you and ask something very big. Or I can downgrade, you say? And the request and say, I want something very small. Now, believe you can think what is nicer and what is more polite. It's easier to say, I want something very easy. I know for you 20,000 shekels is nothing, so I want something very small. God says, I know exactly what I demand. Your son, your only son. After the expulsion of Ishmael, he is his only son. You see the relevance of chapter 21 in this word, only son. Your son, your only son, your beloved son. So it's not, you don't have to tell me that he is your only son. I know exactly that he is your only son. In Bar Ilan, I teach a whole year the Akedat Yitzchak, and what I do today, in one evening I do something in 4 sessions, and then we learn the Akedah in medieval poetry, in Israeli modern secular poetry, and finally in art. So Israeli secular poetry, you can say that the biblical themes, it is the strongest one. In other words, there are more secular Israeli poems about the Akedah than about any other biblical theme. Because the theme of sacrificing children for the sake of the security of our nation, of our land, is a very crucial and central theme. And it's natural that people will choose the Akedah as a mode of expression and say what Abraham was demanded, we are demanded sevenfold, because with Abraham it was not a real sacrifice, with us it is a full-fledged sacrifice. There are among these poems which are strengthening the person who lost his child, and there are others which express a protest. As you know, many poems and pieces of art are expressing protest. And they say, who gave the parents the right to sacrifice their children? Why don't they go themselves? What kind of sacrifices? Is this a legitimate? I would put it very harshly. These parents were too much Zionist and they were more Zionist than parents. They loved the country more than their children. So, we don't learn these poems now. What is important is to take the question of these poems and place it in the midst of our learning. Is Abraham will come out of this story as a wonderful servant of the Lord. But will he come out as a good father? This is a legitimate question. Does the Torah place this question and answer it? So I'm pleased to see that God says, Asher Ahavta, the Son, the only one whom you really love. This is highly important if you ask this question, right? It's not that Abraham is an old man about 100 who is indifferent about children. No. He really loves Yitzchak, which makes the story more human and stronger, right? But surely this is not the answer to our big question. It will hover in this room till we finally understood. So God says to him, now something got lost in the English. Totally lost. And author tries very hard to be faithful to the text. In Hebrew it says, Lech lecha el eretz ha-Moriah. So in English it says, and go forth to the land of Moriah. But you don't hear the words Lech lecha. Now the words Lech lecha appear in the whole Bible. I don't speak about the Torah. I speak the whole 24 books. Only twice. In chapter 12 and in chapter 22. Which means that they appear when God says to Abraham, you go forth from Haran, from wherever you live, to the land of Canaan. And it repeats the same words. Lech lecha. So it was Martin Buber who, in the 20s of the 20th century in Germany, was almost the forerunner of literary study of a biblical narrative. I can't explain to you why he did it. It was an answer to German biblical studies. And usually, may I say it in 2 sentences, usually they would say that the Torah is teaching us to cheat. You know, Jews, they survive by cheating, you know. So Yaakov Avinu is cheating, not Avinu, Yaakov, the father of the Jews, is cheating his father, is cheating his brother, and he's not punished. Which means that we don't blame Yaakov, we blame the Torah. You understand? The problem is why the Torah doesn't say that it was ugly. So Buber lives in this environment, and he asks himself, really, why does not the Torah blame him? And then he found out that the Torah, the biblical stories, especially in the book of Genesis, choose to be written in indirect expression. In other words, instead of saying it's very ugly to cheat, the Torah says Yaakov was punished for his cheating by what happened to him with Lavan. And there is a symmetry between what he did and what happened to him. So if you know to read biblical stories, you see that the Torah is speaking, but in an indirect, so to speak, hidden way. So he discovered, Buber, that one of the hidden ways of biblical expression, narrative expression, is the guiding word. A guiding word means there are 2 kinds of it. He wrote a very famous article. He said there is an internal guiding word and there is an exterior guiding word. An internal guiding word is that the word is repeated in the same story in a very strong way, and you realize that this word is guiding you in understanding the inner meaning. And I tell you, the word Hineni appears 3 times in the story and is the backbone of the story. Without Buber, I would never understood what I would try to explain to you. But there are other guiding words. For instance, the word son, ben, is repeated 10 times in the story. The verb to see is very dominant in the story. So these are internal guiding words, milah mamchayim. But there are also exterior. And the exterior guiding words are very uncommon terms which appear in 2 stories and make a connection between the 2 stories by being nedirim, how do you say? Rare. By being so rare. So you read Lech Lecha, first time you don't know that it is a rare expression. After 10 chapters you arrive at the Akedah and you say, poor guys, they made Aliyah, what do you demand of them? Let them be peaceful in the land of Israel. There is an Aliyah after the Aliyah. He has to descend more. More is even demanded of him. He thought that he has arrived. And here God says, no, no. A religious person never arrives. A religious person is always on the march. Till your last day, to our last day. This is what it says. There's again a Lech Lecha. And then you open chapter 12 and you see לך לך מארצך, ממולדתך, מבית אביך, אל הארץ אשר אראך. You have to go from your land, from your family, from your tribe, to an indefinite destination, to the land which will I show you. You know, there's a law in psychology which says that the way to a destination is much longer than the way back. Haven't you realized this? For sure. Why so? Because if the destination is indefinite, we are nervous. We come back, we know exactly the way back, but we don't know the way to the wedding in Cholon. Very unpleasant experience. You have to devote half an hour for Cholon to find out where this is. How do you say? Hall? All right. So you see in both stories, Abraham is not going to the land of his choice. He's going to the land of divine choice. Why do we live in Israel and not in Switzerland? Because God chose this place. There's no other answer. So we didn't choose it. Then you can say, oh, we chose wrongly. No. It's Eretz HaBechira. It's the land of his choice. The same is here. Why is Yerushalayim a sanctified place? We chose it? David chose it? No. God chose it. To the place which I designate. And you have to go with this nervousness of an indefinite destiny. So we see that there is not only a guiding word which is connecting the two stories, they are eternally connected. You have to give up everything. When I speak with Olim Chadashim like yourself, I respect the greatest sacrifice is the sacrifice of language, of culture. You become strangers in a new country. So Abraham has to give up his property, his land, his connection, his family. Maybe this is the greatest separation. And now he's demanded to give up his son. And the two stories continue. They are structured in a parallel way. Then Abraham builds an altar in Eretz Israel, and here he builds an altar in Har Moriah. And at the end of the story, he is blessed with many children, and the end of our story is also blessed with many children. So Bulwer says, if the stories are so similar, we have to ask ourselves whether they are also different, and this is very important. Whenever we make comparisons, we have to ask what is similar and what is different. And he says, the first Lech Lecha is a rational one. You sacrifice the present and the past for the sake of the future. This is rational. You want to come to the land of Israel, you sever yourself from the past. From your friends, from your families, from the landscape. You sever yourself also from the present, for the sake of the future. Every student who goes to the university does a very rational thing. He sacrifices 4 years of the present for the sake of having a degree and a better life in the future. This is rational. So when Abraham is demanded in Lech Lecha to give up everything, this is rational. Because he wants to be a new beginning. If you want to be a father of a nation, you have to stop to be a son of the former nation. The cutting off is rational. So he gives up his parents, he gives up his brother, and in chapter 21, he gives up his firstborn child. All for the sake of Yitzchak, who is the future. Now he is demanded to give up the future, which is crazy. Outright crazy. What do I mean? It's irrational. And God made an oath to him, promised him in chapter 21, expel Ishmael, ki beYitzchak yikare lecha zara. For in Yitzchak you will have your seed, you will have your continuation. So he has a promise. And now God, how do you say, breaks this promise and says, no, I want also Yitzchak. So it's a very demanding story. It means that Abraham is demanded not only to give up his son, his only son whom he loves, he has to give up his understanding of God, his rationality. He has only one option open, or to obey or not to obey. This is where we stand now. And the next verse says, Vayashkem Avraham baboker. What is so telling is that in the story of Sodom V'Amorah, when Abraham feels that God is doing injustice, he's crying out. But in this story, he's mute. I don't know whether I can answer this later, but it's very important to see that in the Bible, if you agree, you do. If you don't agree, you protest. So Abraham is doing, because he understands the greatness of the demand. And he does not believe that he has an argument. Even so that God has contradicted himself. And this is a very strong argument which he could have used. He prefers to be silent. Vayashkem Avraham baboker. And now I read verse 4 in Hebrew and then in English, and I don't have too much time. What is very interesting is that in Hebrew, verse 4 uses the terms and the nouns and the verbs of verse 3. In other words, in verse 3 there is a command. In verse 4 there is a fulfillment expressed in the words of the command, which says that he did exactly what he was commanded to do. So I read it in Hebrew. Vayashkem Avraham baboker, vayachavosh et chamoro, vayikach, God says kach, et shnei na'arav ito, v'et Yitzchak beno, vayivaka atzei ola, vayakom, vayelech, lech lecha, vayelech, el hamakom asher amar lo ha'elohim. You see that he's really, the fulfillment is stressed now in English. And Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took his two lads with him and Yitzchak his son and he split wood for the offering and rose and went to the place that God had said to him. I believe that it is enough to stress that Abraham is a rich person. He could have split the wood by commanding a servant to do it. Whatever he can do himself, he does himself. See the old man splitting the wood, awakening his servants. Lastly, he awakens Yitzchak. He doesn't say a word to Sarah where they're going to, and they are going to the indefinite destination. My father, my late father, was a great feminist before this was so accepted, regarded me as responsible for biblical studies in our family. And from the days that I've been a student, but later that I've been a scholar, he would really be angry whenever we reach the Parshat HaShavua and says, "Where is Sarah in this story? How come Sarah is not mentioned, but she is not sacrificing it?" And I would give him lengthy explanations that the Bible is focusing on the main hero. This is a very important rule of biblical narrative. And I would say, it's not that Sarah is not important. Please don't take it personally. But the story is focused on Abraham. And he wouldn't take it. I believe that this is true. But if you want to appease my late father a little, you can say, why does he take these two servants? So the realistic answer is that in biblical time there was no central government, and it was very dangerous to move from one place to another, and nobody in the Bible moves alone. Even Bilam goes with two servants. It's unnoticed, but it says in half of the verse, he was with two servants. Shaul is going with two servants. This is how you go. But maybe that there is another meaning, and this is that he wants to camouflage the real purpose of his going in the eyes of Sarah and in the eyes of Yitzchak. And he doesn't tell them where they are going. They are going to make a sacrifice, a regular sacrifice. You will see that this will cause Abraham a lot of trouble, because he will have a problem how to get rid of these two servants. But now they are accompanying him. We arrived at verse 5. ביום השלישי, וישא אברהם את עיניו, וירא את המקום מרחוק, ויאמר אברהם אל נעריו, שבו לכם פה עם ואני והנער נלכה עד כה ונשתחווה ונשובה עליכם. And in English, on the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from afar. And I can't tell you how he saw the place from afar. Chazal, who are very keen about difficulties, say, oh, he saw a special cloud bound to the mountain. And he understood that this is a sign from God. But this is not explicitly written in the Torah. So I must say something probably there was an additional revelation which God told him, this is a place, but the Torah doesn't care to say it in so many words. There is some kind of difficulty here. Anyway, he knows now for sure that this is a place, and so he says to his servants, sit you here with the donkey, and let me and the lad walk ahead, and let us wash it and return to you. In Hebrew it says in the plural, venashuva, and I would dare to say in English, and the both of us will return to you. Now why don't you take a donkey to the holy mountain? Because you don't take a jeep to a holy mountain. You go by foot. You do your respects to a holy place, you don't come with a donkey. But why don't you take your servants with you? And what is worse, Abraham is lying. I hope you don't object to my saying it openly. It's not the truth. Instead of saying, and I will come back, he says, and we, the both of us, will come back. Why is he lying? Because he did not tell Yitzchak that he's going to sacrifice him, and he didn't tell the servants. Right? So he cannot reveal this in an indirect way. It shows that Abraham is loving his son. It shows that he is caring for him. That he's thinking, how will I disclose the truth to my son? And he postponed it to the last day. All this we learned from this lie of his, right? But why doesn't he take the lads? I would, I don't like to lie, so I would say, you come with me. This is a good question. And I can offer you only my dull explanation. I'm not sure that this is true. I believe that there are religious moments which have no social connection, no social dimension. You don't take the press to Har Moriah. No televisions allowed. No witnesses allowed. When he will raise his hand with a knife, maybe he will think, what impression do I do on these lads? And everything will be demolished. There are moments, religious moments, where we have to be alone with God. I believe this is a very strong statement of our story. He doesn't want them. And a small lie is much better than having them around. Because he doesn't do it for his history. He doesn't do it for doing any kind of an impression. He does it only because God demands it from him. So they stay here, and we read in verse 6, ויקח אברהם את עצי העולה, וישם על יצחק בנו, ויקח בידו את האש ואת המאכלת, וילכו שניהם יחדיו. ויאמר יצחק אל אברהם אביו, ויאמר אבי, ויאמר הנני בני, ויאמר הנה האש והעצים, ואיה עשה לעולה. ויאמר אברהם, אלוהים יראה לו עשה לעולה בני, וילכו שניהם יחדיו. Let's read it in English, verse 6. And Abraham took the wood for the offering and put it on Yitzchak, his son, and he took his hand, and he took in his hand the fire and the cleaver, and the two of them went together. And Yitzchak said to Abraham, his father, "Father," and he said, "Here I am," which is Hineni now. "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Here is the fire and the wood, but where is the sheep for the offering?" And Abraham said, "God will see to the sheep for the offering, my son." And the two of them went together. The English translation is outright poetry. So you have a good motivation to learn Hebrew. If you depend on this, somebody said that reading a translation is like kissing a woman with a veil, through a handkerchief. So this is a very bad handkerchief, a very thick handkerchief. So let us start slowly and explain everything. So he takes the wood, and he takes the dangerous things in his own hands, and the heavy things he puts on the left. And so he puts the wood on the back of Yitzchak, from which we understand that he's not a child of 4. But everybody knows that according to the Midrash, he was 37 years old. And we have to make a quick decision whether this is pshat or not. Is Yitzchak a child? Or is he a partner? This is a real question. According to Chazal, 2 old bearded Jews go up the mountain. They are partners. And Yitzchak is to be praised as much as Abraham is to be praised. But how did Chazal arrive at the age of 37? This is simple arithmetic. Sarah was 90 when Yitzchak was born. And in the next chapter, 23, she's 127 years old when she dies. So the Midrash says, why did she die? Not after the Akedah, but because of the Akedah. This is very important. This is a Midrashic connection. This is how Chazal introduced Sarah into the story, to appease my father. Or she was part of the story. She even died because of this. So much did she love her son. So if you come from 90 to 127, you have 37 years. But maybe, says a pshat person like myself, that she died 20 years after the Akedah. It doesn't say when she died. And then he is much less. From the story, from the question, from the fact that afterwards it will say that Abraham raised Yitzchak and put him on the altar, we understand that he is a child and not a grown-up person. All right. So he puts on his back, Ibn Ezra says, he must be below bar mitzvah because he's not part of the test. But he must be a little more than 5 or 7 because he carries the wood. So we agree with Ibn Ezra, something like 8 years old. So Abraham took the wood for the offering and put it on Yitzchak, his son. You see, his son, we don't need this information, we know it already. And he took in his hand the fire and the cleaver. Now in Hebrew, cleaver, I looked it up for you if you don't know this English word. Cleaver is the big knife of a butcher. And in Hebrew it says ma'achelet. Ma'achelet means a knife which consumes what it cuts. Le'echol is to eat. Ma'achelet. Now, this is an exterior guiding word. You have ma'achelet 3 times in the whole Bible. One in this story. The second is in the story of Pilegesh beGiv'ah, the concubine from Giv'ah, where it said that a person cut his wife into 12 pieces with a ma'achelet. And the third verse is in the book of Mishlei, also speaking about human flesh, cutting human flesh. So every biblical reader who would read Ma'achelet would start to shudder. It's not a knife. So it's good that in English they used a rare word to represent the rare word in Hebrew. All right? But you know better than Cleaver, you say Ma'achet. And the two of them went together. Vayilchu shnehem yachdav. All parents who sit in this room, this is what we hope as parents. No generation gap. We go together with our children. Vayilchu shnehem yachdav. But a critical reader like myself and yourself says, oh, what kind of harmony is here? One knows and the other one doesn't know. What kind of harmony between the generations if there's a secret between them, right? So immediately this secret will be the theme of the continuation of the story. Because Yitzchak is feeling uneasy about this lack of information. So it starts with Vayilchu shnehem yachdav, and the both of them went together. And now in English, and I would do it better, I believe, and Yitzchak said to Abraham, his father. This is a regular sentence in Hebrew. In English, but in Hebrew it's a very irregular sentence. It says, Vayomer Abraham, Vayomer Yitzchak el Abraham Aviv Vayomer. So many superfluous words. Vayomer Yitzchak are necessary. El Abraham Aviv I don't need. He spoke to his father, Abraham. We know that there are no other persons there. So why does the Torah says it? Vayomer Abraham el Yitzchak. Vayomer Yitzchak el Abraham Aviv. Vayomer. A second, and he said. And poor translator in California was so ashamed of his Gentile readers that you have. I wrote it here with my pen. You see, in English it will sound very awkward, but in Hebrew it is also awkward. If you would have translated literally, it would say, and Yitzchak said to Abraham his father, he said, Vayomer. Why do you need this Vayomer? And what is the answer of Abraham? And Abraham said, and you know, and what does he say after all these words? Avi, my father. In English, this is nice. They say father because in English you don't say my father. You say father, daddy. So I believe that we have here what is quite common in the biblical narrative, slow motion. It depends on the person who makes a movie whether he will depict the peeling of an orange with 1 second or in 10 seconds, which is a lot in the cinema. You can see it's peeling and peeling and peeling and peeling. You get something is horrible happening here. So this is what it says. Instead of saying explicitly, and it was very difficult for Yitzchak to break the silence. The Torah says, and Yitzchak said to his father Abraham, and he said, you see, he needs another verb. And he said, what did he say? Father, which means, may I ask you something? And Abraham is listening exactly as we are listening, and he says, Hineni beni. Here I am with you, my son. Now, I forgot to ask for a blackboard. So, I will have an, how do you say? Virtual, yes. How do you know what I want to say? A virtual blackboard which will serve also for the people in the other room. You imagine a blackboard. And in the middle of the blackboard I write in English, Abraham. And above Abraham I write, God. And below Abraham I write, Yitzchak, Isaac. And now I ask, what is the relationship between Abraham and God? And I put an upright arrow from Abraham to from up to down, how do you say? Downward. Downward. Yes, downward. And again I write next to it, Hineni, comma, my son. And all the lawyers in this room say you don't make a contradicting commitment to two persons, to two parties. If you are totally devoted to God, how can you say Hineni to your son? And maybe the son said, Hineni means whatever you ask for me, I will do. And the son said, I want back to mother. So he says, no, I didn't mean Hineni. Understand. How can you say Hineni to a son whom you have to sacrifice? Here you have the answer whether Abraham loved his son or not. The deep answer in the language, in the hidden language of an interior catchword, leading word. Abraham knows that he will ask difficult questions because this is the role of children. You know, children ask us the worst questions. Mommy, why, father, why do you say in this income tax return that you are older than you are? Why do you do this? You know, simple question. So Abraham is prepared to this question. So what could he say if he doesn't want to get the question? Sorry, son, I'm busy. Don't you see that we are going to a holy place? I'm saying Psalms, I'm saying Tehillim. How dare you interrupt me? Or if you would be a university professor, would say, I'm writing an article. What is holier than this? Later I will answer to you. If this would have been the case, Yitzchak would be orphanized before he would be sacrificed. He would go alone to the Akedah. And this is something which is unacceptable to Abraham Avinu. He says, no, you deserve a father. And your father is with you. Please say whatever you want to ask me, ask. I'm your father, I'm here, I'm with you. Hineni. You have to be very courageous to say Hineni to different parties, which are potentially contradictory. And then Yitzchak says, Hine ha'esh v'ha'etzim v'ayeh ha'seh la'olah. Here's the wood, here's the fire, but where is the sheep for the sacrifice? Which means, and in my modern terms, dear father, I understand why you didn't take a sheep, a goat from Beersheba to Yerushalayim. It's very difficult to convince the animal to walk these 80 kilometers. So I was sure we arrive at the old city, you buy a sheep. But you didn't. Father, something is wrong with our story. Here's the wood, here's the fire, but where is the sheep? Which means what you understand. That he thinks maybe I'm the goat, maybe I'm the victim. But there is something additional dimension to this question. We clever readers know that there are three things there. Esh, v'etzim, v'ma'achelet. The fire, the wood, and the cleaver. So why doesn't Yitzchak mention the knife? So you ask Sigmund Freud and he answers you. He doesn't dare. But Abraham Avinu knew psychology. You believe this or not? For sure he knew psychology. So Abraham is, how do you say, some level, realizing that the child does not dare to mention the knife, which shows for sure that he knows what the answer to his question. It's not only a very clever question of a child, it is also a telling question because it doesn't mention the cleaver. Now place yourself in the place of Abraham Avinu. What should he answer? I give you time by drinking. There are two opposite ways, which are wrong ways to deal with such a question of children. One radical wrong mode of dealing with it is you are too young that I can't explain to you. Wait till you are 60, I will explain to the architect. Which most parents do. Sexual questions, economic questions, you are too young. He is not young enough to question, so why is he young enough to get the answer? This is a horrible way to evade a serious confrontation, which we call in biblical terms, hineni. The opposite way is also very wrong, is to say children have the same rights and understanding as adults, and you don't hide anything from children. They want to see blue pictures in the movie, you can't. They have their rights. You cannot prevent them. Children are with full rights, right? If a child asks you a question, you tell him the truth. Tell him the truth? You are the sheep, my dear son? Impossible. So what is the right way to deal with such questions, which all of you know? It's to reveal to a child whatever he can grasp at this moment of his development. And the grown-up has to make an assessment. What can he understand and what can he take? It's not a mental understanding. What his psyche can take and what his psyche cannot take. I believe this is what Abraham Avinu is doing. It's a wonderful way of dealing with the problem. So we'll read it in Hebrew and then in English. Vayomer, וילכו שניהם יחדיו. No, it's the end of verse 8. ויאמר אברהם, אלוהים יראה לו עשה לעולה בני. וילכו שניהם יחדיו. And to my great regret, the translation is literal and you can't understand what the Hebrew means from this translation. So he says in English, and Abraham said, God will see, Elohim yir'eh lo, the sheep for the offering, my son. What does it mean, God will see? And in a footnote, the author writes, the meaning of see, I didn't change the word see because it's a guiding word, and the root to see is very important in the story. So I translated it literally, but the meaning is provide. And this is the way they translated in the good old King James Version and till the new JPS. And it's a wrong translation. You imagine I and my son going to visit an old aunt of mine. And there's a stairway, my bright son says, but father, what is the present for the aunt? And I say, don't worry, the aunt herself will provide the present. What kind of an answer is this? You know why people made this grave mistake? They knew the end of the story. Abraham doesn't know the end of the story. In the end of the story, God really provides the ram. So they destroy the story, make Abraham into a prophet. He's not a prophet in this story. If he would be a prophet, he would say, oh, it's a happy ending, I don't have to care. You understand? He's not a prophet. He's a regular person. And he doesn't know that God will provide. So poor readers who don't know Hebrew, they are misled. God will provide. Now, the word to see is very difficult in this context. So a biblical scholar is interested in biblical narrative, opens the concordance and says there must be a different meaning for the verb ra'o, for the verb to see, which fits this context. And sure enough, I find that to see in the Bible occurs some 10 times with the meaning of choose. It says, God says to Shmuel, go to Bethlehem and anoint one of the children of Yishai, because I saw a among his children the future king. What do you mean I saw? I chose. Or a stronger verse, Yitro says to Moshe, אתה תחזה מכל העם אנשי חיל. You will see among the people proper judges. What do you mean we will see? You will choose. Now, insert the word choose here in the story, and it says, dear son, it is God who chooses the sacrifice. But he says it in future terms. God will choose the sacrifice, my son. And this is a second lie, excuse me. He knows exactly whom God has chosen. But he doesn't want to impose the full truth on the head of the small child. So he says, dear Yitzchak, you have to understand. Sacrifices to God are highly demanding. If God would have asked me what I want to bring as a sacrifice, I would say, take all my herds, but not my son. But the choice is not in my hands. The deep meaning of the Akedah is, says Abraham to his son, that God will choose the proper sacrifice. And just as you don't know, I still don't know. Which means it could be me, it could be you, it could be Uriel. So he's telling him the inner core of the Akedah without terrifying him by saying, we humans don't know the whole story, but we know that it is in the hands of God to choose what he wants from us. It's a very difficult statement to make, but this is the inner meaning of religiosity. And then it says, now they again go together, but it is a true harmony, which means that Abraham was able with his answer, which is a very deep answer, respectful of the ability of the child and the limitations of the child. Now the child is satisfied that he's going to the Akedah with a true father, and they're going together. We are very happy about this development, and we see how the Torah is addressing the issue of whether Abraham is only an obedient servant or also a model of a father. Now they arrive at Har Moriah, and the story becomes more and more tense. ויבואו אל המקום אשר אמר לו האלוהים, ויבן שם אברהם את המזבח, ויערוך את העצים, ויעקוד את יצחק בנו, וישם אותו על המזבח ממעל העצים, וישלח אברהם את ידו, ויקח את המאכלת לשחוט את בנו. Verse 9. And the two of them went together, and they came to the place that God has said to him. And Abraham built there, you see, he does everything by himself, his own hands. Abraham built there an altar and laid out the wood and bound Yitzchak, his son. La'akod is to bind. And he bound his son and placed him, he raised him and placed him on the altar, on the top of the wood. And Abraham reached out his hand and took the cleaver to slaughter his son. So we'll now have to say, I consulted my watch, I see that I have to hurry up, so we'll do it in a less intensive way. Abraham is doing everything himself. Why is he binding him? This is a good question. Does it mean that he doesn't trust him? Does it mean that he is afraid that he will run away? So in the temple we know that they would bind the sacrifices, the victims, and they won't bind them as you visualize the Akedah, hands with hands and feet with feet. But in the temple, in the second temple, they will bind the hand, the forefoot, with the back foot and the other foot. In other words, they would bind them on the sideline and not in this way. And probably this is what is meant here. And maybe the answer is that we in modern surgery do bind the person operated because we are afraid that he would do an involuntary movement and destroy the surgery, right? So we may say that Abraham trusted Yitzchak that he won't run away, but he did not know how Yitzchak will react when he will see the knife. So he's binding him. This is for sure. And now we have again slow motion. וישלח אברהם את ידו, ויקח את המאכלת, and Abraham reached out his hand and took the cleaver. You see, there are many superfluous words here. Could have said that Abraham took the cleaver. No, he reached out his hand and took the cleaver, because the Torah wants us now to concentrate on this horrible moment. And now, ויקרא אליו מלאך אדוני, verse 11, ויקרא אליו מלאך אדוני מן השמיים, ויאמר אברהם, אברהם, ויאמר הנני. ויאמר אל תשלח ידך אל הנער, ואל תעש לו מאומה, כי אתה ידעתי, כי ירא אלוהים אתה, ולא חסכת את בנך, את יחידך ממני. So an angel from heaven appears, and please don't ask me after the lecture, as always people do, why does not God speak to him directly but with the agency of an angel? I don't know the answer. Please believe me. So I don't know. But I know for sure that in only 2 stories in the whole Bible, an angel speaks from heaven. And this is in chapter 21 with Hagar, in chapter 22 with Abraham. But here there is an urgency. You could have said, you don't have time to speak with him directly, you send an urgent... but with Hagar there was no urgency. So this is another riddle which we cannot as yet answer. But anyway, the angel says, don't touch your son, with a double wording, Al tishlach yadcha el hanar, don't raise your hand to the boy, Ve'al ta'as lo me'uma, and don't do anything to him, which means, why does the angel call him Abraham, Abraham? At the beginning of the story there was one Abraham. What is better, a person who answers immediately or a person who answers after he's called twice? My children had to be called 5 times. And then they would say, Rega. Poor children, such a father. They would always say, Rega. It's very difficult to say Hineni, very difficult to say, I am at your service immediately. So why does he say, Abraham, Abraham? I don't know. Am I supposed to know everything? But I can suggest. And I have a suggestion, I don't hide it. When we are at a very difficult task, for instance, writing an article, we hope that the phone will call us. We hope to be disturbed. Then we have a digression. So Abraham is afraid of himself and says, maybe I'm not called, but I want to be called. Maybe I wait for this intervention. So I want to make sure that I'm called. So first Abraham, he doesn't answer. Second Abraham, he has to answer. And he says, Hineni, unbelievable. Once again he says, Hineni. What a person. So please recall our virtual blackboard. You have Abraham, you have God, you have Yitzchak, you have an arrow going upright and says, Hineni. Now again, we make another arrow. And we say, another Hineni. Which means that Abraham is reinforcing his Hineni towards God. And saying, You want something from me? I'll do whatever you want. I'm totally yours. Hineni. And then God says, you are in this tension of a double commitment, reinforcing the one towards God. I'm relieving you from this tension. I don't want your son. Don't dare to touch him. Do whatever I say to him, Hineni 10 times a day. Be his father forever. Not because you relieved yourself from the tension, because I relieved you from it. You can be fully his father from here to your death. This is the beauty of this story. That Abraham was a full-fledged servant of the Lord. But God does not want child sacrifice. And this was only a testing. Now, a few sentences about the ancient setting. Abraham is, all his neighbors bring sacrifice, child sacrifice to their gods. And maybe Abraham had a feeling that they are more religious than he is. Because he is sacrificing animals and they are sacrificing children. And I don't have time to speak about child sacrifice in Old Canaan and in Carthago, where there were Canaanites. We have a whole burial of children who were sacrificed. Anyway, God says to him, from this day you know that you are as religious as your neighbors, because you were prepared to bring your child. But I am different from their gods. Their gods want children and I don't want children. Please note, this is the Akedah is not only revealing the greatness of Abraham. The Akedah is revealing the greatness of God. He says, I am different from all gods. I don't want children. It's forbidden to sacrifice children. Yirmiyahu says it very clearly. But it's written also in the book of Vayikra very often, don't bring child sacrifice. So we go through this testing of Abraham. See, Abraham is prepared to do it, but is forbidden to do it. Now he stands there, and he raises his eyes, and he sees the ram entangled in the bush. What does it mean entangled? The ram wants to clear himself off, but he's caught. Caught? By whom? So in good secular English you say by coincidence. In religious language you say he's sent by God. And he has now a visual revelation. Just like Hagar saw the water, he understands that he was lying. No, excuse me. He understands that he was saying the truth when he was lying. He says God himself will choose the victim, and he thought, I know, but I can't reveal it. Now it turns out to be that he did not know. Isn't that wonderful? He did not know. And God is saying, no, against your expectations, I want the ram, but the ram will be equal. If you sacrifice the ram, I regard it as if you have brought the greatest sacrifice which can be. So forever, for all those who were a little troubled by my daring to say that Abraham was lying twice, I want to conclude and say, blessed is a person whose lies God turns to be true. Isn't that something? He says, we come back, and they surely will come back. He says, I don't know whom God chose, and surely he did not know. So blessed is Abraham. I think this is enough of the story, so we can now fold it up, and I'll read it very quickly in Hebrew and English. Vayaleu leolah tachat beno, and he's making a sacrifice instead of his son, which means in place of his son. Vayikra Abraham shem hamakom ahu Adonai yir'eh, asher yamer hayom behar Adonai yir'eh, and he called this place God will choose. Could you believe this? This is a play of words on Moriah. You ask yourself, why is this mountain called Moriah? Abraham says, you know why. I make a play, a pun. Because the essence of a temple, the essence of the holy place is that we do what God demands of us. God will choose the victor. Asher yamer hayom behar Hashem yira'eh. In later times, it says they would say this is a meeting place of God and man. Behar Hashem yira'eh. And now God is sending the messenger again. Vayikra malach Adonai el Avraham shenit min hashamayim vayomer bi nishbati neum Adonai ki yan asher asita et hadavar hazeh ולא חסכת את בנך, את יחידך, כי ברך ברכך בהרבה זרעך, ככוכבי השמיים, וכחול אשר על שפת הים, וירש זרעך את שער אויביו, ויתברכו בזרעך כל גויי הארץ, עקב אשר שמעת בקולי. Now the great blessing which Abraham deserves after this ordeal, and the Lord's messenger called out to Abraham once again from the heavens, and he said, by my own self I swear. This is nice. God says, you got a promise of mine that it will be Yitzchak who will ki Yitzchak yikare lecha zera, and the day afterwards I reconsidered my promise. Now I take an oath, God says. Don't be afraid, Abraham. I won't retreat from this promise. So God is swearing. He's taking an oath. And he says, so by my own self I swear, declare the Lord, that because you have done these things, the Akedah, and have not held back your son, your only one, I will greatly bless you and will greatly multiply your seed and as the stars of the heavens and the sand of the shore of the sea, and your seed shall take hold of his enemy's gate, which means he will be victorious in military conflicts. And all this for what? Why have you been chosen? And all the nations of the earth will be blessed through your seed, because you have listened to my voice, which means that the choice of Israel is not for its own sake, it's for the sake of humanity. All the nations of the world will be blessed because you are such a faithful servant of the Lord. And Abraham returned to his lads, and they rose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt in Beersheba. The last verse of the Akedah is the very same last verse of chapter 21. In 21 it says, Vayagor Abraham, and he sojourned, he lived like a stranger in Beersheba. Now he is more deeply connected to the earth. But anyway, Abraham is again in a peaceful situation. Now, if you allow me some 5 minutes more, wow. There is, the chapters of the Bible have been, the divisions to chapters have been done by the Archbishop of Canterbury in the 12th century. Stephen Langton was his name. And he had a good literary taste, but we don't have to, it's not Torah for us. Well, we take it if we want, if we don't take it if we don't want. He made a very great mistake, very famous. In the first chapter of the Torah, he cuts the Shabbat and puts it in the second chapter. But no Jew would have done this, because we understand that the Shabbat is the ending of the week of creation. Anyway, Stephen Langton didn't end this chapter with Vayagor Abraham, Vayeshev Abraham Beersheba, but he has an ending which is an anticlimax. And I won't read it in Hebrew, but it is such a dull information. I read it directly in English, and if some irony will smuggle itself into my words, it is intention. The problem is it a connection of the Akedah? Or it would have been better to make a separate chapter of it. Because the next chapter is the death of Sarah. And Langton hated small chapters. So he was really in a dilemma. What should he do with these verses? So he decided to attach them to the Akedah. Now I'll read them and I am free. I can decide whatever. All right? So, and it happened after these things, once again, Achar HaDvarim Ha'eleh, that it was told to Abraham, saying, look, Hine, Milcah too has borne sons to Nahor your brother. Not only you have a son, but Milcah, the wife of Nahor, your brother, has also children. Uz, his firstborn, and Buz, his brother, and Kemuel, the father of Aram, and Chesed, and Chazor, and Pildash, and Idlaf, and Betuel. Now something very interesting, and Betuel begot Rivka. Oh, this is good news, because we are concerned that Yitzchak has to marry. So we get here a little hint that there is a Rivka waiting somewhere in the old country. These 8, forever globe for anybody who can't count with his fingers, these 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother, and his concubine, whose name was Reumah. She too gave birth to Tevach, and to Gacham, and to Tachash, and to Macha. Most of these people we don't know. They are mentioned only here. Others we know. What does this mean? Or in halachic language, on Rosh Hashanah, when we read the Akedah, should we read these verses and destroy our story? Or end up before them? And Chazal, not knowing Stephen Langton, decided like Stephen Langton. We read, and the Bar Kriyah said, and Macha, with a great triumph, Macha was born too. What could this mean? So you have to understand that biblical narrative speaks in a hidden language. It is very clear that Nahor had 12 children, 8 and 4. 12 in the book of Breshit is the number of national wholesomeness. If you want to say this person had arrived in a full-fledged nation, you say he had 12 children or 12 tribes. Ishmael had 12 children. Esav had 12 children. I tell you a secret. Yaakov will have 10 children, 12 children in 2 generations. From 4 wives. But Nahor, the non-Zionist brother of Abraham, who stayed in the old country, shame on him, has 12 children. What news? There comes some Bedouins on camels and tell Abraham, you know, we know your brother. He had a bar mitzvah to his 12th child. And Abraham and Sarah are looking to each other and say, he got 12 and we got 1. And this one was almost taken from us. This is the true meaning of being in the chosen people. You can hate me for saying this, but this is the truth. All nations have their flags and the UN for centuries. And finally you have the blue star of Israel in the United Nations. We are latecomers. God promises Abraham to be a nation and to get a land. First of all, his wife is barren. Finally, Yitzchak is born, then he's almost taken away. And the land we will get in the days of Yeshua. What does this mean? It means that to be a Jew, we You need patience, religious patience. You are a nervous Zionist who wants achshav, 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 who wants everything to be fulfilled in the present. The Jewish people won't survive this. The Jewish people exist because for 2,000 years we had the patience of Abraham Avinu. The patience to believe that finally we'll get where other peoples have got before. This is really annoying, right? So I want to please you. It is true that we get what other peoples get very late. But only the children of Abraham are sitting at Pardes at Tuesday night and learn the story to this very day. Shalom.